welcome to the Explainer. Some stories in the Bible just jump out at you. And today, we're opening a case file on one of the most shocking and, frankly, disturbing ones, the sudden deaths of Ananias and Sapphira.
So, to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to conduct a full-on investigation. We'll break down what happened, look at the community they were in, figure out what the real crime was, dig into their motive, and finally, try to understand that final, harsh verdict.
All right, let's kick things off by just laying out the facts. What exactly happened, according to the account in the book of Acts?
Okay, so the timeline here is just wild. It unfolds with terrifying speed. You've got this couple, Ananias and Sapphira, who sell a piece of property. Ananias goes to the apostles, presents a chunk of the money, but pretends it's the whole amount. The apostle Peter calls him on it, and boom, Ananias just falls down and dies. Right there. Then get this, 3 hours later, his wife Sapphira shows up. She has no idea what just went down. Peter asks her about the money. She tells the exact same lie, and she dies on the spot too. I mean, wow. One lie, 2 deaths, and a community just left in total shock.
And this, right here, is the question that's bugged people for centuries. If the whole point is a merciful God, then why was this punishment so final, so immediate, and so incredibly severe? That's the real mystery we're digging into today.
Okay, so our first clue. To even begin to understand the crime, you have to understand the community where it all went down. And look, this was not your average church group. This was a radical social experiment. And as we're about to see, a single lie could actually threaten its entire existence. The author of Acts, Luke, does something really clever here. He sets the stage by giving us a hero first, a guy named Barnabas. Barnabas sells a field and lays all the money at the apostles' feet. And for this, he gets a ton of honor. By putting this story right before Ananias and Sapphira's, Luke is drawing a line in the sand. He's showing us, here's the gold standard, and here's what happens when you fall short. So what was this community? Well, scholars call it a community of goods. Basically, it was this super high commitment group where everyone voluntarily pooled their resources. The whole thing was built on radical transparency and trust. You didn't have to give everything, but pretending you did while secretly holding back, that was a direct hit on the one thing holding them all together, trust. And what's fascinating is they weren't the only ones doing this. You had other groups in the ancient world, like the Essenes or the Pythagoreans, who also had this all-in communal lifestyle. And guess what? They all had super strict rules about lying. If you were deceitful, the punishment was harsh. Expulsion was basically a social death. Some groups would even hold a mock funeral for you. So this context is a huge clue. For these kinds of communities, a lie wasn't just a mistake. It was a poison that could kill the whole organism. Okay, so we see this wasn't just about fudging the numbers. The charge Peter levels against them points to something much, much deeper, a spiritual crime. And Peter's words are just piercingly clear. He says, "You have not lied to human beings, but to God." You see, for them, their unity wasn't just a social thing. It was grounded in the real presence of the Holy Spirit. So lying to the community wasn't just letting your friends down. It was seen as lying directly to God. This gets even clearer when you look at this specific Greek word used here, phenosphestai. It's a really specific term. It doesn't just mean to steal. It means to embezzle or profane something that's been set apart as sacred. So the crime wasn't keeping money for themselves. Peter actually says, hey, the money was yours to keep. The crime, the sin, was taking something that was only a part of the whole and deceptively passing it off as if it was the whole sacred gift to God. But still, you have to ask, how does a lie, even a really bad one, cause instant death? It seems so extreme. Well, to get our heads around this, some scholars bring in something called speech act theory. It sounds academic, but the idea is simple. Some words don't just talk about the world. They actually do things in the world. Think about it. When a judge says, "I sentence you," they aren't just describing a future event. Those words are the act of sentencing. They make it happen. So, applying that here, the theory goes that Peter isn't just speaking as a private individual. He's speaking as a prophet with divine authority. So his words aren't a prediction that judgment is coming. No, his words are the judgment. They are the performative utterance that makes it happen. Because it's backed by divine power, the sentence is carried out instantly. It's frankly, a terrifying display of authority, meant to establish a boundary right at the beginning of this movement. Okay, so why? Why would they do it? Why risk everything for a lie? This brings us to maybe the most human part of the story, the motive.
And the general consensus among scholars is pretty simple. They wanted the glory. They saw Barnabas get all this praise and honor for his incredible generosity, and they wanted a piece of that action. They wanted the public reputation of being totally committed without actually having to pay the private price.
You can even look at this through a modern lens, like emotional intelligence. And what you see is a total failure of self-awareness and integrity. I mean, the whole community ideal was built on transparency and trust. But Ananias and Sapphira, they chose deception and manipulation just to look good. They valued their image more than their integrity. And in that community, at that time, that was a fatal mistake. All right, let's pull all these threads together, let's bring all the clues to the table, and deliver the final verdict on why this judgment was so incredibly severe. So here's the bottom line. The punishment was so severe because the crime was seen as existential. This wasn't just about money. It was an attack on the very soul of the community, its unity, its trust. It was a public test of the divine presence that was supposed to be at its center. And you have to remember the timing. This was happening at the very birth of the ecclesia, the assembly. It was a one-time critical moment where setting a precedent for holiness was everything.
And that right there also helps answer that nagging question, why don't we see this today? Well, the scholarly view is that this wasn't meant to be a rule book for all time. It was a unique, foundational judgment. Think of it like laying a cornerstone for a massive building. It was a singular, powerful act, meant to establish a sacred standard right at the very beginning, not a repeating pattern.
So, in the end, this nearly 2,000-year-old story leaves us with a question that feels, well, incredibly relevant today, doesn't it? In our own world, a world that's often obsessed with image over integrity, what does it really mean to be authentic in the communities we belong to?
This entire explainer was built on the work of many scholars who have really dug deep into this challenging story. We're grateful for their insights. Thanks for joining us.